April 6, 1945, off Okinawa, East China Sea. Dawn breaks over Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet. On radar, picket destroyers positioned 16 mi from the main fleet. Sailors scan the horizon, knowing what approaches. In the Combat Information Center of USS Lee, radar operators track incoming contacts, not dozens, but hundreds. The ship's 5-gun crews load shells marked with cryptic VT designations, each containing miniaturized radio transmitters that would revolutionize naval warfare. The goal is desperate. Survive Operation Kikusui number 1, the first of 10 massive coordinated kamikaze attacks. At 600 hours, the sky fills with aircraft. Through the morning haze comes a sound that will define the Battle of Okinawa. The drone of hundreds of Japanese aircraft engines approaching in waves. Pilots sealed in cockpits with no intention of returning. Leading the assault are pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy Special Attack Units. Their Zero fighters and Yokosuka D-4 Yijudi dive bombers, laden with 250 kiloton bombs, followed by waves of older aircraft pressed into suicide service. Among them, specially trained Oker pilots sit sealed in rocket-powered flying bombs carried by Mitsubishi G4MB Betty bombers. What happens next will demonstrate the revolutionary impact of American proximity fuse technology and reveal why Japanese kamikaze tactics, initially so devastating, would ultimately fail against the most sophisticated anti-aircraft system ever deployed. The American VT proximity fuse had arrived in the Pacific Theater after 2 years of combat testing that began with a single historic shot. Developed through a crash program initiated in 1940 by Section T of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory under Dr. Merrill Tuve, the proximity fuse represented one of the 3 most critical secret projects of World War II alongside radar and the atomic bomb. The fuse operated on a brilliantly simple principle, a miniature radio transmitter receiver that would send out continuous radio waves and measure their return frequency. When the Doppler shift indicated proximity to a target, the fuse would detonate the shell automatically. No longer would gunners need to estimate exact distances and set mechanical timers. The shell would know when to explode. The technical challenges had been staggering. The fuse's components, including tiny glass vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania, had to withstand acceleration forces of 20,000 times gravity when fired from a 5-gun. The projectile would reach 2,600 ft/s while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute through the gun's rifling. Every component had to function perfectly after this violent launch, then operate reliably in temperatures ranging from 100° to -50° F. By April 1945, American factories had produced over 15 million proximity fuses for naval use in the Pacific Theater. Manufacturing had been distributed across multiple contractors. Crosley Corporation alone produced 5,025,913 fuse, 24% of the total. RCA, Eastman, Kodak, General Electric, and McQuay Norris combined with 87 different firms using 110 factories engaged in various phases of production. This massive industrial effort ensured that American forces at Okinawa were equipped with the most advanced anti-aircraft ammunition ever created. The United States Navy had increased proximity fuse allocation from 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition in 1943 to 75% by 1945. This represented recognition that Pacific Theater combat against kamikaze attacks demanded revolutionary defensive capabilities. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship carried thousands of VT-fused 5-inch shells as their primary defense against suicide attacks. Standing in stark contrast was the Japanese kamikaze program born of desperation. Following catastrophic defeats in the Marianas and the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan had lost the majority of its experienced pilots and aircraft carriers. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet, had proposed the formation of special attack units in October 1944. Arguing that conventional tactics could no longer succeed against overwhelming American firepower. The kamikaze represented Japan's attempt to transform its remaining inexperienced pilots into precision-guided weapons. The mathematics seemed favorable. While conventional attacks achieved hit rates of only 2% against heavily defended American ships, early kamikaze attacks in the Philippines had achieved success rates exceeding 34%. A single pilot in a Zero fighter carrying a 250 kilo bomb could potentially sink, or a destroyer. trading one life and one obsolete aircraft for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in damaged warships. The Kamikaze pilots underwent abbreviated training that emphasized spiritual preparation over flying skills. Many had less than 100 hours of flight time, compared to the 500-plus hours of their predecessors at Pearl Harbor. They were taught basic navigation, ship recognition, and most critically, the final diving approach that would evade anti-aircraft fire. The pilots wrote final letters, participated in ceremonial sake toasts, and received samurai swords or rising sun headbands before their missions. But no amount of spiritual preparation could overcome the technological revolution they were about to encounter. The ochre suicide weapon represented the ultimate expression of the kamikaze concept, nicknamed Baka Fool by American sailors. This piloted bomb carried a 1,200 kilogram warhead powered by 3 solid fuel rocket motors. With a maximum speed of 575 mi/s in terminal dive, it was designed to be unstoppable once released. Yet its fatal weakness was range, barely 10 meter, requiring vulnerable Betty bombers to carry them directly into the teeth of American defenses. The contrast in defensive philosophy was absolute. American ships at Okinawa deployed in concentric rings of protection, with radar picket destroyers positioned to provide early warning and bear the brunt of initial attacks. Each destroyer carried 12 to 16 5-in guns capable of firing VT-fused shells, creating overlapping fields of fire. The proximity fuse transformed these weapons from area denial systems into precision instruments. A 5-in VT shell had a lethal burst radius of 70 ft, compared to just 20 ft for time-fused shells. More critically, the fuse eliminated the complex calculations required for conventional anti-aircraft fire, allowing gunners to engage targets immediately upon detection. The morning of April 6, 1945 would put these systems to their ultimate test. Operation Kikusui No. 1 involved 391 Navy planes and 133 Army planes, of which 215 Navy planes and 82 Army planes were kamikazes, a total of 297 suicide aircraft in a single coordinated assault. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton of USS Laffey later described the approaching kamikaze waves as resembling a swarm of bees, heading for the only flower in the desert. The first wave struck at 0600 with radar operators tracking over 50 aircraft approaching from the north. The picket destroyers opened fire at maximum range 12,000 WD with VT-fused shells. The proximity fuses proved devastatingly effective against the approaching formations. Each shell that passed within lethal range of an aircraft automatically detonated, filling the sky with steel fragments. Unlike time-fused shells that required precise range estimation, the VT fuses turned near misses into kills. Within minutes, dozens of Japanese aircraft were falling into the sea. Their suicide missions ended miles from their targets, but the kamikazes kept coming. At Aero 744, USS Laffey came under concentrated attack by 22 aircraft in 80 minutes. The destroyer's gunners fired 345 rounds of 5-in VT ammunition, destroying 9 attackers outright. The proximity fuses allowed Laffey's guns to engage multiple targets simultaneously, switching rapidly between aircraft without the delays required for fuse setting. When kamikaze pilots attempted their standard tactic of approaching at wavetop height to avoid radar detection, the VT fuses proved equally effective, detonating when the shells passed close to the sea surface and creating walls of fragments that shredded low-flying aircraft. Despite this devastating defensive fire, Laffey was struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs, yet survived. A testament to both American damage control and the fact that proximity fuses had prevented many more attackers from reaching their target. The effectiveness of the VT fuse was no accident. The technology had been secretly tested in combat since January 5, 1943, when USS Helena fired the first proximity-fused shells in action off Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochran, commanding the aft 5-in battery, shot down a Japanese ICD-3A Val dive bomber with the second of 3 salvos. The shells had detonated without direct hits. They had simply passed close enough to trigger the fuse and tear the aircraft apart with fragments. This single success validated 3 years of intensive development that had overcome seemingly insurmountable technical challenges. The fuse contained approximately 130 electronic components miniaturized to fit in a space smaller than a pint milk bottle, all manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandth of an inch. By the Okinawa campaign, post-battle analysis revealed the mathematical superiority of proximity-fused ammunition. Time-fused 5-in shells required an average of 162 rounds to destroy each kamikaze, VT-fused shells reduced this to 310 rounds per kill, a nearly fourfold improvement in effectiveness. In optimal conditions, the results were even more dramatic. The destroyer escort USS Abercrombie destroyed a Kamikaze with just 2 VT rounds in May 1945. The destroyer USS Morrison, defending against a massive Kamikaze attack on May 4th, shot down 8 attackers in minutes using proximity-fused ammunition before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The psychological impact of the proximity fuse on Japanese pilots was profound. Surviving Kamikaze pilots who aborted their missions reported the terrifying experience of approaching American task forces through seemingly solid walls of exploding shells. The distinctive black puffs of VT explosions appeared with uncanny accuracy, as if the American gunners could see exactly where each aircraft would be. Japanese tactical doctrine had assumed that high-speed, low-altitude approaches would minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire. The proximity fuse invalidated these assumptions entirely. Shells that would have missed by 50 FT with conventional fuses now detonated lethally close, turning the final approach into a gauntlet of precisely timed explosions. Vice Admiral Matayugaki, directing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, noted in his diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, Japanese naval intelligence estimated that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft were reaching their targets, compared to 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign. The difference was primarily attributed to what Japanese reports described as new-type anti-aircraft shells that seemed to explode with impossible accuracy. Ugi wrote, "The enemy's defensive firepower has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously considered safe." Individual American sailors operating the 5-in guns with VT ammunition became legends within their task forces on the destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley. During the May 11th attack, gun crews claimed 17 confirmed kamikaze kills using proximity-fused ammunition. The gunners developed a technique of leading kamikaze aircraft with continuous fire, creating a wall of VT that attacking aircraft had to fly through. Their gun crews could fire 15 rounds per minute, each shell equipped with its own electronic brain seeking targets. During one 52-minute period, Hugh W. Hadley's guns destroyed multiple kamikazes in succession, with the proximity fuses ensuring that even shells passing above or below the rapidly maneuvering aircraft would detonate effectively. The story of USS Aaron Ward during the May 3rd attacks illustrates the proximity fuse's role as a force multiplier. When 40 kamikaze aircraft attacked the destroyer, her 5-in batteries fired continuously for 52 minutes. The VT-fused shells destroyed 6 attackers completely and damaged 5 others severely enough that they crashed into the sea. Commander William Saunders later testified that without proximity fuses, his ship would have been overwhelmed in the first 10 minutes. The ability to engage targets without precise range of finding allowed Aaron Ward's guns to shift rapidly between multiple threats, something impossible with time-fused ammunition. These accounts were multiplied across the entire fleet. During the 10 major Kikusui operations from April 6 to June 22, 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 1,900 aircraft in organized kamikaze attacks. American naval forces, primarily using VT-fused 5-in shells, destroyed hundreds of these attackers before they could reach their targets. Statistics from the Operations Research Group showed that ships equipped with proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks than those relying primarily on conventional ammunition. The proximity fuse had transformed what should have been a catastrophic tactical innovation into a costly but manageable threat. The disparity in technological adaptation became apparent as the campaign progressed. American forces continuously refined their proximity fuse tactics, discovering that VT shells were particularly effective when fired in patterns that created overlapping spheres of fragments. Ships began coordinating their fire to create these VT boxes through which kamikaze aircraft had to fly. The Japanese, meanwhile, could only respond with tactical variations, dawn attacks, multi-axis approaches, mixing conventional and suicide aircraft, none of which could overcome the fundamental advantage of shells that knew when to explode. The production statistics told the story of industrial warfare at its apex. By June 1945, American factories were producing 70,000 proximity fuses per day. The entire war effort would see over 22 million proximity fuses manufactured at a cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency, roughly $15 billion in today's dollars. The Crosley Corporation alone employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Each fuse cost had dropped from $730 in 1942 to just $18 by 1945 through mass production efficiencies. This massive investment proved worthwhile when Navy analysis indicated that proximity fuses prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japanese industrial capacity, devastated by strategic bombing and resource shortages, could produce nothing comparable. While Japanese scientists had understood the proximity fuse concept, German reports on Allied special ammunition had reached Japan via submarine. They lacked the industrial infrastructure to develop and mass-produce such sophisticated devices. The vacuum tube technology alone required precision manufacturing capabilities that Japan's war-ravaged industry could not achieve. Japanese radar development critical for understanding proximity fuse principles remained primitive compared to American systems. The Type 22 radar, Japan's most advanced naval set, operated at wavelengths that made miniaturization impossible even if manufacturing capacity had existed. The effectiveness of the proximity fuse influenced Japanese tactical doctrine in the campaign's final stages. By May 1945, Kamikaze pilots were instructed to approach American task forces at maximum altitude before diving vertically onto targets, hoping to minimize exposure to VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. This tactical adjustment, while reducing losses during approach, made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ships could maneuver out of the dive path, and the high-altitude approach gave radar operators more time to track incoming aircraft. The attempted solution proved counterproductive. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of amphibious forces at Okinawa, credited proximity fuses with making the invasion possible. In a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations, Turner wrote, "Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable. The Japanese Kamikaze was a formidable weapon that could have changed the outcome of the Pacific War if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense." His assessment was echoed by Admiral Mark Mitcher, whose flagship USS Bunker Hill survived a devastating kamikaze strike on May 11th, partly because proximity-fused fire destroyed 3 other attackers that would have finished the crippled carrier. Admiral Arleigh Burke, Mitch's chief of staff, later recalled the effectiveness of proximity fuses during a 1978 interview. "When I went as chief of staff to Admiral Mitcher, who commanded the fast carrier task forces, all the 5 and 38 and 5 and 25 ammunition was fitted with VT fuses. And as you well know, those fuses knocked down enemy planes by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our ship losses and casualties in the fast carriers in the last half of the war would have been enormously larger." The proximity fuse's impact extended beyond mere statistics. The technology fundamentally altered the morale equation that made kamikaze tactics viable. Japanese military doctrine assumed that the certainty of death for their pilots would be balanced by the near certainty of hitting enemy ships. When success rates dropped below 20% due to proximity fuse defenses, the exchange became unsustainable even by the brutal calculus of suicide warfare. Young Japanese pilots, many of them university students drafted into the special attack units, began to understand that their deaths would likely achieve nothing. Letters recovered after the war revealed growing awareness among kamikaze pilots that American defenses had evolved beyond what their commanders had promised. Lieutenant Yukioki, leader of the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had achieved devastating success against escort carriers in Lee Gulf, when proximity fuses comprised only 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition. By Okinawa, his successors faced a fundamentally different reality. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nonaka, leading the Thunder Gods Corps, equipped with Oker-flying bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21, 1945, without a single Oker reaching launch position. American fighters guided by radar intercept officers shot down all 18 Betty bombers. But even if they had broken through, the wall of VTF-fused anti-aircraft fire would have been impenetrable. The technical sophistication of the proximity fuse represented more than just superior manufacturing. The device embodied fundamental advances in electronics, material science, and systems integration that Japan could not match. The miniaturized vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania and Rathon, used special glass formulations that could withstand tremendous shock. The battery system, activated by the acceleration of firing, used an electrolyte that remained stable for months, then activated instantly when needed. The radio frequency was precisely calculated to minimize interference while maximizing detection range. Each element represented years of focused research backed by unlimited funding. Meanwhile, Japanese anti-aircraft defenses remained primitive. The Type 98 100mm anti-aircraft gun, Japan's best heavy AA weapon, still relied on mechanical time fuses that required manual setting before each shot. Japanese naval vessels at Okinawa, including the super battleship Yamato during her final sortie, carried anti-aircraft ammunition that was technologically equivalent to what Americans had used at Pearl Harbor. When Yamato faced over 300 American aircraft on April 7, 1945, her 162